episode number 14 of the Zoom in series of Vasant Vihar Club. We've had diverse programs. We've had programs on cooking, on gardening, book discussions, and today we have a book discussion in store for you all as well. It's my pleasure to welcome Mr. Ajay Mangotia. Welcome, sir. He is a former income tax officer and he has written this book, and we would certainly like to know what prompted him to write this book and also share some of his stories with us this evening. So welcome, Mr. Mangotia, and we look forward to listening about
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for inviting me.
In conversation, we have Raj Sharma. So many of you know Raj Sharma, and as this was being, as we were just talking about, Raj is a resident. He is also a member of the Vasant Vihar Club. He's in charge of food and beverages. He has extensive experience of in the food and beverage industry, and he's a business consultant in the food and beverage industry. So, Raj, today you wear the cap of being the interviewer, or shall I say, in conversation with Ajay Mangotia. So over to you. And viewers, can I just request you all to keep your mic on mute? And if you have any questions you would like to ask, please type them. And we will have some questions at the end once the conversation is coming to an end. So over to you, Raj.
Thank you, Sanjana. And once again, good evening, ladies and gentlemen, members of Vasant Vihar Club, and good evening, Ajay. Let me first of all begin by introducing Ajay. Ajay pursued his economics honors from St. Stephen's College, and it was followed by a master's degree in economics from Delhi School of Economics, Delhi University. He also has a diploma in international economic relations from University of Paris. And thereafter, he did a bachelor's degree in law. So he's also LLB from Law Center, Delhi University. Ajay joined the Indian Revenue Service in 1982, has worked at a wide variety of posts in the Indian government, and during the course of his career, he was also deputed as Chief Vigilance Officer of some public sector fertilizer companies. And when he was Commissioner of Income Tax, he decided to opt for voluntary retirement, which was in 2008. And having spent 26 years as a taxman, he joined a media company as President of Corporate Planning and Operations. And presently, he runs his own tax and legal advisory. Ajay also has vast areas of interest. He writes regularly. He writes on, obviously, on tax and vigilance, but also on music, films, sports, defense, lots of topics. And particularly on his, interest in music, we will probably come to during the course of the interaction. I don't want to give away everything about his interest, and we'll talk about it as we go along. Suffice to say that one of his, the special feature about him is that he was my classmate in St. Stephen's College. And that is how I have known Ajay for many years. Ajay, when I look at this book, and when people look at this book, it has a very, if I may call it a black cover with a straight line heading about, the title of the book. And probably if I was to see it in an airport bookshop, I may not immediately be drawn to it. But of course, I have read the book. And when you read the book, you realize how true that age-old saying is, never judge a book by its cover. So this book actually is fairly racy. It goes from one episode to another fairly rapidly. It's anecdotal. It has some very interesting anecdotes, and it's something that any of you would enjoy reading. We will talk about the various facets of this book as we go along, and some of the things that have been written in this book. But before we go into that and delve into that, Ajay, fundamental question: what prompted you to write this book?
So before I start, good evening, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here with you. Before I come to why I wrote the book, there are a lot of people who have asked me this question as to why I named it. There's 7 for you, 3 for me. Now all of you who are fans of the Beatles, you must have heard a song called "The Taxman," which was sung by George Harrison. And the first line of that song is, "There's 1 for you, 19 for me. I'm a taxman." Of course, that song was made in the mid-60s when the rates of taxation in England were very, very high in the socialistic era. So I borrowed the concept of the title from that particular song. There's 7 for you, 3 for me. The rate of tax being 30%, out of 10, 7 goes to the taxpayer, 3 remains with the government. So that's the reasoning behind the title. And of course, I hope over the years, the title changes to "There's 8 for you, 2 for me," and maybe sometime thereafter there's 9 for you, 1 for me, as the rates come down, hopefully. So now why I wrote this book?
At the moment, it would be reasonable to assume that most of the people in Vasant Vihar are in the 30% bracket.
Well, I would think so, yes. I would think so. Now, why I wrote this book is, again, the trigger was a very, very peculiar one. Many years back, I underwent a medical procedure. And the doctor, a very, very eminent doctor, he told me that he'd give me an anesthetic shot and that it would pinch me a little. It won't pain me, it will pinch me. So he said, be prepared. So as the anesthetic needle plunged in, I felt pain, and I told him so. So I'm lying on that operating table. There's its lights on top, and so he comes, wearing a mask and with his team, eyes twinkling, and he says, "Now, Mr. Mankotia, you know how we feel when we go to the tax department." So that set me thinking, actually, because he had some issues with the tax department many years earlier. He had claimed certain expenses which are not allowed because they were not pertaining to his profession. He was taxed on those expenses. There was some penalty that was imposed. But after that, he cleaned up his books. He threw out his accountant. He cleaned up his books. Everything became absolutely hunky-dory. And he had absolutely no issues with the tax department thereafter. But that incident still rankled. So the perception that he had of the tax department, which started at that time, still persisted. Now, this wasn't helped by the kind of media reporting that was going on. Frequent raids, people being harassed during raids, some people dying during raids or after raids, taxmen taking coercive steps to recover taxes. So there was a very negative, one-sided reporting of these kind of things that were happening with the tax department. It wasn't balanced reporting. So this fueled the perception issue. I'll give you one more example. We talked about music. I joined a music club, and we used to have these monthly musical gatherings at members' houses one by one. And so this was this lady. She just joined the club, and her husband was was a businessman. So when she heard, when I was introduced to her and she heard that I'm from the tax department, she actually had a fainting fit. She had palpitations. She started sweating. She sat down. Then she was told that I'm a retired person now, and and then she asked me a very, very bizarre question. She said, "But tell you one thing, how can a taxman sing?" So I knew exactly where she's coming from. The perception that she had is widely shared perception across the country, and the reason being that no one knows what the taxman does. No one knows what he faces, what are the challenges he faces. No one knows about the kind of daily situations that he deals with. So this book was written primarily to shed the spotlight on the taxman, to remove any misconceptions, wrong perceptions that people may have about him, to remove the cobwebs of ignorance that people have about him, to bring him center stage, because the perception is that he's a shadowy figure lurking in the dark, pouncing on the unsuspecting taxpayer, sober, serious, has no other work except to collect taxes. So this book was basically meant to demystify the tax man, to humanize him, to show him for what he is, to show to the public at large the kind of work he does, the challenges he faces, and to bring him center stage so that people know exactly what he's all about. Now, paying taxes is not a very, very popular thing for people, not only in India, all across the world. I was in France for a year, and the moment I was introduced as, the French equivalent of taxman is perceptor. The moment I was told that he's a perceptor, there used to be the French equivalent of, oh my God, So it's a impression which lasts, which is existing all over the world. It's a very unpopular job. Somebody has to do it. He does it. There are of course a lot of things that go wrong, for which he has to be castigated. He has to be penalized. But you can't use the same brush to tar everyone else in the same department. So there are a lot of good people who do very good work in the department. I've tried to highlight that through my own experience in the tax department by using anecdotes, incidents, real-time anecdotes, incidents, without, of course, naming them, so that people get to know exactly what are the various things he does: assessments, penalties, policy making, administration, election duty as a expenditure observer. So I've used all these incidents, anecdotes to describe what he does. My style of writing is racy, it's irreverent, it's farcical also, but that's to counterbalance the very serious work that he does, which people are not aware of. So to make it more accessible to the public at large, I've used that particular style. So that's the intention of the book. Now, of course, every department has its own peculiarities, its own eccentricities. So I've captured that also to make it more multidimensional, more textural, more rich. My wife has written 2 articles in the book on tax wives, for example, and on the concept of Diwali gifting, which all government servants confront with in their careers, what to accept, what not to accept. So it's a hilarious with a serious subtext of work they do in order to humanize, demystify the taxman. So the thing is, I've tried to explain that the tax department is a service department. The tax man is the service provider. The taxpayer is a valued customer, and they should never ever forget that. Don't treat him as a god. Don't treat him as a demon. Treat him as a human being doing unpopular work. But you are the center of the universe of the tax department. You are the customer. He's a service provider. And that's where now the department is now moving towards. from a government department to a service department. So that's what my book explains.
Great. You talked about the fact that you had joined the music club, and I didn't mention it in the introduction, but I can tell the viewers that Ajay is very fond of singing. He sings mainly Mohammad Rafi and Mohammad Rafi songs and Mehdi Hasan ghazals. And he also has a passion for Western music, in fact, even more so for Western music. So, bands like Pink Floyd and Jethro Tull, etc. But let me start, you said that there are several amusing incidents. As I'm concerned, one of the, amusing incidents very early in your career when you joined the institute, the Lal Bahadur Shastri Institute in Mussoorie. On the very first day, Ajay came from Stephens, the last all-male batch. So the male bastion was broken the year after we joined the college. And when Ajay went to Lal Bahadur Shastri Institute, the very first day, a young lady, sister of a friend, came up to him and said, "Hello, Ajay Bhaiya." And Ajay was very horrified because he said, "Ke yahan pe mujhe bhaiya wala image mat deo, so don't call me bhaiya," because he was hoping that here is an opportunity for me to probably flirt with some participants in the course.
That's a very scurrilous statement you made, yeah.
Yeah, so I'm probably adding a little masala to that, but that's the way I read it. Ajay, you talked about being selected for a training in France, and that was your very first foreign trip. And there were several amusing incidents. So without my picking them, perhaps you can talk about a couple of the amusing incidents that happened during that first foreign trip.
Well, I'll highlight one of them. I went to France a few months after I got married. So I landed up there, and my wife followed me 3-4 days later. And we were staying in this hostel in the suburbs of Paris, which was mainly hostel meant for foreign students. And most of the students there were from Africa. And so she walked in through the lobby, she came to the room. We stayed in that one room apartment for 3 months. We used to cook there, I used to study there, we used to entertain there. I used to sleep on the floor, she used to sleep on the bed. And just a week before we were to leave that particular accommodation and go to the university area where the main course was to start, and we got a duplex apartment for married couple. We came back to the hostel and we found the room locked. So we went down on reception and asked. So they said, "Is this lady your wife?" I said, "Of course, she is my wife. She's been staying here with me for the last 3 months. You also see her every day." They said, "But I'm very sorry, wives are not allowed here. Only girlfriends are allowed. Because girlfriends come and go. Wives stay on here forever, so wives are not allowed, and only, in France they call copines. Only copines are allowed, not wives." We said, "We just got a week left now. We are shifting anyway. Please, if you can just accommodate for a week more." So they were very, very gracious enough to do that. And so that's one thing we learned there, that girlfriends have a higher role. They're placed on a higher pedestal than wives are.
And also during that stint, and I think during a longer period in France, you had some interesting anecdotes to relate about the bathing habits of Europeans, which you
I think we should let
completely diverse from the Indians.
Well, bathing habits, of course, we'll let them read about it in the book. But again, the first day in the university hostel that we got, the married accommodation, we had a communal kitchen. We had a kitchen on every floor. So my wife, first day, went to the kitchen and she She made dal and she put hing and she put lesan ka tadka. And there was a furor in the hostel because, everything was, there was no exhaust fans those days. Everything was closed because of the winters. And the Europeans just couldn't stomach both the aroma and as well as the
Fumes.
the fumes and the sight and the sound of the thing was something which they never seen earlier. So immediately we were told that no, tadka will not work here. Please have a bland food only. So that actually helped us in the long run because we lost a huge amount of weight there.
No, I was talking more about the bathing habits. You said
Bathing habits, I think let people read it in the book here.
Achha, okay.
leave something for the book also. Yeah.
In your description of the very first, raid, or as you described it, search and seizure
Yes.
activity, you said that the people who were being raided got a little aggressive, and you were yourself a young officer, and you got saved that day because there was a lady officer with you.
Yes. So let me, if you permit me, can I read the particular passage so people know what exactly happened? It's a very, very interesting thing that happened, and I will read the passage to you. So we raided a politician in UP. The raid was organized from Delhi, and the local unit there came for the raid with us, including the local police force. So we knocked on the door. Eventually, of course, he was very, very shocked to see us there, the politician. He thought he was above the law. Anyway, the raid started. And what happens is that in any raid, you have to call 2 witnesses from the neighborhood to witness the raid and to ensure that everything goes as per law. So we asked him to call 2 witnesses. He called the local school principal and the school teacher. The raid started. A few hours later, I'll read the passage now as to what transpires. Not long thereafter, we heard a loud sound growing louder by the minute. We were with the politician upstairs, going through the books at that time. The thunderclap was approaching the house from the front side. In the courtyard, the policemen stood in huddles, wearing frowns and tightening their grip on the rifles and lathis. The pit in our stomachs started ringing alarm bells of foreboding. We didn't have to wait for long. Cries of "Hi, hi" and "Murdabad, Murdabad" reached our ears before the crowd appeared at the front gate. School students stood at the gate carrying out their deathly chants. They carried sticks and chains. The gate stood no chance. It yielded meekly and the crowd stormed in. अब आप लोगों के साथ क्या किया जाए? The politician jeered. The atmosphere in the room had turned menacing. The team members' faces had turned ashen with dread. We requested the politician to intervene in the matter. Stopping the raid through use of force would be counterproductive and illegal, we tried to reason. But our entreaties fell on deaf ears. He was a man possessed and showered us with the choicest abuses. Before we could react, a massive uproar came from downstairs. "Maro, Maro," came the frenzied yells from the rear courtyard. Looking down from the rear window of the upstairs room, we saw the back door open. The police were running in the fields, the crowd giving them a spirited chase. Many of them had dropped their rifles and lathis. We were horror-struck. The police had well and truly abandoned their posts and had left us at the mercy of an enraged politician and his bloodthirsty goons. Now, what happens thereafter, how the things unfold, what are the casualties, if any, is all there in the book. So these are the kind of things that a taxman faces in the normal course of his duty.
Yeah. No, I think, I mean,
And
you
the
made
film
it
Raid,
clear that
the film Raid was partly inspired by this particular raid because the way the crowds collected and the way they behaved thereafter. You know, these are all school students who the principal of that school and the teacher had called to stop the raid. The witnesses themselves had called these guys from the school to stop the raid.
Yeah,
So,
during some of your raids, you mentioned that you came across what you called number 3 ka paisa. Everybody knows about number 2 ka paisa. There was something called number 3 ka paisa.
yeah, so you know what happens is that this is a very typical Indian institution of pin money. The husband, mostly businessmen, they hand over a particular sum of money to their wives every month to run the household expenses. And most wives, they keep a part of that apart for a rainy day, you know, for some unforeseen expenditure in the future. It's all well intentioned. There's no subterfuge involved. It's something which every wife does, taking a portion of the money, saving it somewhere, you know, in the deep folds of a sari, inside her trunk. So many places where they can keep the money for a rainy day, or to buy some jewelry later, or for the child's education, some medical emergency. Husband is not aware of this pin money. So what happens during raids, this money, obviously when we go through, we rummage through every almirah, every drawer, every piece of furniture in the house, room by room. These things then come tumbling out. Now husband normally get shocked when they see the money coming out because they're not aware of it. And because this is most usually, unexplained money, it gets unfortunately seized. And then the husband, the way he behaves with the wife, the way these things are enacted before us. And of course, we try and intervene and make sure things don't turn ugly. But it's a very sad situation that we are confronted with when these things come tumbling out here. Because husband not aware of it. So hence number 3 ka paisa, which neither the department nor the husband is aware of. So, and of course, these things also came out during demonetization. You know, one of the unintended consequences of demonetization was the financial infidelity, as they call it, which was uncovered, where wives had no option but to take out the money and put it in the bank, you know, or seek their husband's help for regularizing the money that they had, which husbands are not aware of. So this is what happens in raids normally, where pin monies are found and husband is not aware of it. And hence number 3 ka paisa.
Yeah. No, it's very interesting, the number 3 ka paisa, and of course your explanation of financial infidelity. In one of the offices, you talked about the importance of circulars and communication in Hindi, and how to me it sounds like as the movie goes, lost in translation. That when it is translated from English to Hindi, Hindi to English, and the whole meaning changes because somebody has made some mistakes in translation.
Yeah. So this was this. Normally, what happens in government offices, Hindi is also, of course, given its prominence, which it should also, being the national language, one of the national languages. And you normally see in any government circular instruction, which is in English, there's a line at the bottom, Hindi version to follow. Anyway, so all the officers of various departments, including the tax department, are supposed to also carry out some work in Hindi. It's compulsory. You're rated on the kind of work you've done, whether you met the targets or not, in doing your work in Hindi. So in one such particular instance, a note had to be sent to the Ministry of Law. I was working in the Central Board of Direct Taxes at that time. So I got the note translated into Hindi and then sent it to the Ministry of Law. The Ministry of Law, whenever anything arrives there or any other ministry, they also have to then retranslate it back into English because everybody is not familiar with Hindi. So this process of translating from English to Hindi, then it goes to the other ministry from Hindi to English, has then these kind of inbuilt, amusing situations where the actual meaning sometimes gets lost in translation. And what you see, when you receive the thing back from them is something so different from something that you'd sent to them in the first place. So it's just a peculiarity of how we function in the government departments that I try to highlight as an amusing, aside as to how these things happen in government departments.
You were posted in Bombay. You were there in 1992 when the Harshad Mehta scam happened. Harshad Mehta, or the Big Bull as he was called.
Yes.
As a taxman located in the financial capital at that point in time, what was your take on the Harshad Mehta scam?
I was posted in Bombay in May '92, and by which time the markets were at the peak. Harshad Mehta was the god of Dalal Street. People used to follow him blindly. The markets are just going through the roof. People used to take tips from him, buy whatever he was buying, follow him, every second of the day. Till Sujita Dalal covered the scam in the Times of India, and the whole thing just came plummeting to the earth. Now, the scam took place because of, largely speaking, diversion of money from the government bonds to share market through, various instruments which the banks used to use for their own trades. So these are all transactions which were illegal against the RBI circulars, RBI directions. So then we were confronted with this issue that since these transactions took place which were against the RBI rules, were they illegal? And if they were illegal, was there any tax consequence to it? So as a result, we had to actually study the RBI Act, the various capital market, rules and regulations that were present at that time. We were sent on training by the government of India. I was doing assessments of public sector banks and some foreign banks. So banks were also involved in all these transactions. And after that, then we, with a huge support from the Central Board of Direct Taxes, we did arrive at a conclusion that the transactions that they, entered into against the RBI instructions were illegal, and all the net losses they had made in these transactions could not be allowed to be set off against their other profits, because these are losses arising out of illegal transactions. And so we made these additions. These were sustained in appeal also. The JPC also commented, the Joint Parliamentary Committee, they also commented very, very highly on the work we had done. Justice Variava, the commission that was formed, also commented very, very positively on these developments. So it was a very, very satisfying experience as to how these things happen in the first place, and how unregulated the market was, how unregulated the interbank transactions were, and how therefore stricter laws were then passed. SEBI came into the picture, how things were cleaned up, and how we went about taxing these transactions so that people, then were careful then in the future. There's a huge deterrence that was instituted, and things then got cleaned up very, very thoroughly in the capital markets. So that was a very, very satisfying experience.
Yeah.
It happens only once in a lifetime.
Let me move from this very grim, serious subject to a little light-hearted one. Bombay also means, apart from being the financial capital, it means Bollywood.
Yes.
And the possible raids that you had on the Bollywood actors, actresses, particularly actresses. I think you had some amusing incidents in that book about the raids on actresses.
Yeah. So well, Bollywood being the being being in Bombay and we also being posted there. Raids on Bollywood were part and parcel of our lives there, and so we had some very interesting raids on these film stars. The people have a very wrong view of the film industry. They only see the glamour, the glitter, the neon lights. What happens behind that? The dark underbelly, the reality, the what they go through, what their actual life is all about, is totally different from what you see. So as a person, as a taxman who actually went into the houses and saw what was happening behind the screens, it's a very sad experience. So, but of course, people want to know what happened, and so of course I've taken no names and just described it very broadly speaking. But you see, for example, in the case of many film stars, the assets are in the names of the parents, which film stars are not aware of. So, and parents explain that as as their old age security, that after she gets married or he gets married, what happens to us? So we have to also take care of ourselves, and therefore these are kind of issues that came to the fore when we went there, and of course the influence they bring to raid proceedings. You can't raid a film star without getting a phone call from either a politician or from an industrialist. You get a phone call immediately. Okay, thoda bhaiya dekh lena, go easy, or call off a raid. You can't call off a raid, but please go easy on them. Go as per norms, which of course we do. There's no, we are not doing anything illegal or something which is against procedure. But they all bring pressure to bear on the department the moment you reach their houses. And politicians and industrialists very happily jump in and speak with us and say, "Ke bhaiya dekh lena." Be kind to them, be easy on them.
So this your stint related to Bollywood also brought you close to a very great music director, O.P. Nayyar, who I know had a significant impact on your life, and you've been influenced by his music and songs created by him.
So O.P. Nayyar, he was in the 90s. He'd already retired from the film industry. He was living a life of penury. He had no money with him at all. He was living as a paying guest in Thane. His family had thrown him out of the house for his wayward ways. Every wealth that he had was given to the family. He had absolutely nothing with him. He was staying in one room, paying guest accommodation in Thane. When I got to meet him, I helped him out with some royalty that was stuck in one of the music companies. They weren't paying him for many years, so it was stuck there in a red tape kind of situation. So I helped release that for him. So that's how I got to know him. So I used to, and I was very fond of his songs. So I used to go very often and meet him there and talk about music. And used to have many pleasant evenings talking about the film industry and his stint as a music director. And so that is a very fascinating part of my stay in Bombay, and he of course also came to our house many times. And in fact, once he'd given up playing the harmonium, but when he came to the house, he played harmonium, and I sang some of his songs, which was of course the highlight of my stay there. It was absolutely wonderful to have him over. So, but it's very sad to see, a person who was at the height of the peak of popularity. He had the entire world on his, farms and everything taken away and living a life like that. And when he died, finally, there was nobody from his family who came for the funeral. Handful of people, admirers were there. So this is again a stark reality. This is again shows you how ephemeral success is, how ephemeral money and wealth are, how people can go from one end to the other end during the course of a lifetime. It's a very humbling experience.
Ajay, you talked in the beginning, you mentioned that your wife Fatima wrote two chapters in the book, one of them regarding Diwali gifting. And I can see in that the principle that you followed fairly similar to what professional companies, the corporate sector also follow, that a Diwali gift of consumables of a reasonable value would be acceptable, but nothing very expensive. So I know that you had several amusing incidents. In fact, it just reminds me of one amusing incident that I had heard, that one government officer told someone that they said Diwali ke liye hum भेजेंगे किसी को, तो उसने कहा कि हाँ ये हमारा एड्रेस है, and you ask you can come up the stairs, turn right, and there will be a white door, and you can ring the bell with your elbow. So he says, why with the elbow? He said, नहीं, आपके दोनों हाथों में बड़ा सा दिवाली गिफ्ट होगा ना, तो आप घंटी हाथ से तो बजा नहीं पाओगे, तो एल्बो से बजा देना. तो what was your own
actually, my wife the first time it happened, because in Delhi these things didn't happen that time. I was in Delhi before I went to Bombay. Bombay, for the first time we saw this thing happening. I was in office and I got a call from my wife. A driver of one of the taxpayers had come to the house. He rang the bell with a gift and told her, "Ke, madam, ye gift aaya hai Diwali ka, and please sign here as a token of receipt." Now, she'd never ever seen this kind of thing happening earlier. So she rang me up. She said, what's happening? I said, I have no idea. Let me just find out. So this was the most impersonal, mechanical, absolutely, I would say, the un-Indian method of gifting, but which we then realized later is a standard way across the length and breadth of the country. Of course, so small mithai ka dabba, small a curio or a mantelpiece, those things are fine. But wherever big gifts were delivered, it used to be a big no to them. So she's written on that a hilarious piece on Diwali gifting, and also a piece on income tax vibes. How because she was a working lady there, so they were either the wives or they were the lady tax officers, and she was somewhere in the middle. She was not a tax wife, but she was also not working in the tax department. So again, a hilarious piece on how what was her experience there and how things then settle down and how.
So Ajay, we are running short of time, and I'm sure that people have some questions. But just last 2 points that I want to make. One is that you have mentioned about the salaries in government jobs, which were not very interesting at that point in time. And you're given the example of what Lee Kuan Yew said, about the
peanuts and monkeys.
Yeah.
So let me tell you one thing now. What's happened is that over the years, these salaries have increased manifold. The salaries are very, very, I won't call them excellent now, but they are very good. And the perks are also there. You have housing, you have cars, you have other benefits, medical benefits, for example. So I think salary is not a very strong or a predominant issue now with the tax department or any other government department. Salaries are now very good. I don't know, of course, all the time when I was there, my salary when I joined the NADT, the National Academy of Direct Taxes in Nagpur, was 1,300 rupees. My father used to send me money every month to sustain myself. From 1,300 now to many thousands, it's a big leap now over the years.
Good.
So I don't think that's an issue anymore.
Yeah. Towards the back end of your career, you had a stint as the Chief Vigilance Officer in one of the PSUs.
Yes.
Anything interesting?
So I was, Chief Vigilance Officer is the ears and eyes of the Chief Vigilance Commissioner in all these PSUs. So it was a very different experience there, where you can initiate a lot of good things for the benefit of the company. Like preemptive or preventive, vigilance matters. For example, there used to be many complaints received about purchases of fertilizer bags, corruption there. So we introduced a concept of what's called a reverse auction, where you go online and the people bid for the contract, and they bid each other downwards. So it's all transparent, it's all immediate, it's something which is faceless. You're not interacting with the vendor, and therefore the chances of corruption then get minimized here. So a lot of work you can do in those areas there. And of course, one very sad part of my stint there was the fact that so many PSUs, which were once upon a time the toast of the country, like Sindri, for example, Sindri Fertilizer Company. Every foreign dignitary used to come to India used to be taken to Sindri. Please have a look at Bhakra Nangal and Sindri. These are the big monuments of industrialization that we have in our country, and Sindri has now closed down. And there are many Sindris which are closed down in the country. The employees still stay in the ghost towns. There's no electricity, there's no water, there's no schools, there's no dispensaries, there's no upkeep, there's no maintenance. How these people live, how they survive, it's a very pathetic condition that they go through. Just one example, I went to one PSU unit near Calcutta, and the Delhi ministry had specifically sanctioned the lunch budget for my visit there. So the management came, and we all had lunch together in the restaurant there. And once the lunch got over, the bearer came and he asked for dessert. So I'm not a dessert person. I said no. So the chief manager said, "Sir, this ice cream is very good. You must have it." I said, "No, thank you so much. You please go ahead and have it." He kept insisting. So I said, "Why are you insisting? I don't want to eat it." He said, "Sir, you know what happens? I have two daughters. The ice cream that I would have ordered, I would have given one to her. And I was hoping that your ice cream, I'll give to my other daughter. They haven't had ice cream in the last 6 months." I was, it was such a sad thing to see this kind of a pitiable state they are in. Of course, I ordered an ice cream and I gave it to him. But this is what's happening. And this is not highlighted by any media. So these are the kind of things that I was exposed to, and I wrote about it. I hope something comes out of it.
So Ajay, after you took early retirement from the government service, you joined a media company, as we said in the beginning. There is no mention about that in your book. Do you have plans to write another book on that part of your life?
That will be the subject of my second book, because now I've seen the department from the other side of the table. I was on one side for 26 years. Now I've seen the other side for the last 10 years, or 10 years when I was in the company, and now I'm practicing tax and legal person now. So I've seen the department from this side also. So that's the topic for my next book.
Okay, great. So Thank you very much, Ajay. We'll open it up to the audience. Anybody who has any questions, and Sanjana, if there are any questions already on the chat, you could read them out. But if anybody has a question, please go ahead.
Yes, Sanjana, I have.
Please
Sanjana,
ask Mr. Balla. First of all, thank you, Mr. Mankotia, for that very interesting
It's a pleasure.
description of your book. It's actually sad to hear, the rise and fall of people, because that's something we never. When
Yes.
somebody is successful, we only see the success. We actually never see the pain and the suffering,
Yes.
which is, which is behind that success. So
Yes,
thank
true.
you for reminding us about that. And never knew about the Teesre Ka Paisa. So that's something certainly which is new, which we've learned. And also, does this...
So I wanted to correct Ajay and say not all wives, not all women have a तीसरे number ka paisa, but probably.
No, I mean,
quite a few.
you may have Teesre number ka paisa, but you don't know whether that's how it's referred to, as Teesre number
You
ka
know, just to interrupt here, there are some instances where I know where the wife has forgotten where she kept it.
I can totally believe
So
that.
in one or two raids, actually, it came out and she didn't have any idea. She said, "Oh, thank God, I found it." Yeah.
Okay.
yes,
The other thing
Sanjana.
I was commenting on was, does this thing about translation from English to Hindi and back to English, does that still happen, or is that something...
Well, it's more professionalized now. These things used to happen during my time. Now things are absolutely professional and
Thank God.
everything now. It's the services are professionalized completely. The kind of people who are joining now services, the background they come from, the kind of attitudes they have, the training that is imparted, it's world-class training now. That the tax department and other departments now impart to their probationers. So it's now a professionalized service. It's all government departments have now turned professional. So and therefore things have improved considerably. Many people may still differ with me on that score, but we are moving in that direction now.
That's
Yes,
reassuring.
Sanjana.
Yes, Mr. Bhalla, please go ahead.
Yeah, Ajay ji,
जी.
you have
You can
mentioned
switch
in
on
your
your
book.
camera if you would like.
पता नहीं कैमरा कर दो मुझे तो.
आप कर लीजिए camera on.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, Ajay ji, you have mentioned in your book about tax terrorism.
Yes.
And also, I will say that this is a very debatable, and particularly those who are studying for civil services, they do care about how to answer about tax terrorism. Can you please give your
Yes.
views?
So Bhalla sahab, ऐसा है कि I completely agree with you. It's a thing which existed and which to some extent still exists now, and there are some reasons for that. For example, you're aware of the Benami Prohibition Act.
Yes, please.
Now there are no circulars, there are no guidelines, there are no case law, there's no commentary on this particular act, and this act is a draconian act. If people are not still aware of how draconian the act is, but now thousands upon thousands of notices are being issued. Your property is forfeited. You're penalized 25% the value of the property. You can be sent to jail up to 7 years. Now, what happens is, because there's no guidance given by the government, every tax officer interprets the act in his own way, his own intelligence, his own
Oh, I see.
outlook, his own. So what's happening is that there's total mayhem all over the place. There's no consistency anywhere. Everybody is trying to interpret the way they want it. Now, of course, ultimately you may win the matter, but litigation is the biggest punishment. You may come out of the litigation 10 years later with your reputation intact, but those 10 years that you spent on litigating, spending money on the lawyers, losing a peace of mind, spending your time on these matters rather than running your business.
Yes, absolutely.
It's a punishment.
Right.
So the process is a punishment. Ultimately, you may win, but what's the point of it all? So that's one area where tax terrorism still exists. The other is where you amend the tax law retrospectively. You do something today which is allowed as per tax laws. Tomorrow in the budget, you pass a law which is different from the law which exists today, and you apply it retrospectively, like it happened in the case of Vodafone. When there's no certainty, you're not sure as to what the act is going to be a few years later. How do you work with a peace of mind? So this is also one example that's there.
Absolutely.
A government sets very, very high targets for collections,
Right.
which are not realistic. The pressure on the taxman to collect the revenues that have been very, very highly set on a very unrealistic basis. He'll take coercive means to collect. He'll attach your bank account. He will make additions to your assessments which are unwarranted, so that he can collect the taxes.
Oh yeah.
So these are things which led to tax terrorism, but things are now changing. Government is aware of these kind of things that are happening, and so instructions have been passed. Things are percolating down. Things are improving gradually, and I think in the coming years we would have much a lesser incidence of these things that then were happening a few years back here.
Yeah. Very nicely explained. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Mr.
Mr.
Puri,
Ralu
you had
Walia-
a question. Mr. Puri, you had a question.
Yeah. Hello?
Please go ahead.
Sir, I have a, IRS service means both custom officers and income tax officers. Now, most of the revenue in the country is generated by the custom department, but still people are so much afraid, common public, is of the income tax people. Made the case of immovable property construction, made the case of, scrutiny of your case. So why this, sort of impression is created that income tax is not user friendly? Number one. Number two, is there any Benami Property Act like foreign country like USA or France?
Yes. So, Puri Sahab, aisa hai, what's happening is that you're right. Most of the things that you said, we are now moving to what's called the faceless e-assessment, where the taxpayer doesn't have to go to the tax office, where things are done online. You submit your documents, your arguments, your return of income online. The tax department will ask its questions. Questionnaires will be issued online. You answer those questions. You submit documents which are necessary to substantiate your replies, and then the assessments are passed. This ensures two very, very important things. One, no harassment at all to the taxpayer, no corruption, because your case, you sitting in Delhi, your case will be picked up at random through
Draw lot.
not draw lot. There's a system by which anyone can be allocated your case. So ITO in Visakhapatnam may do your case. You'll never get to know. So it'll be immediate, it'll be transparent, and it'll be absolutely faceless. There'll be no interaction with the tax department at all. So one very, very major area where corruption used to take place in certain pockets was the interaction between the taxpayer and the taxpayer. That's stopped now. It's intended to be stopped now. That's one. Secondly, I think the fear that people have of the tax person is highly exaggerated. If you've done nothing wrong, if your books are clean, there's absolutely no reason to fear him. There's nothing he can do. Raids are very, very rare. And for raids, you just can't, it's not on a whim. There's a full process involved. You have to have information in your possession that you've hidden income or concealed income. You have to make out a case. The thing has to be approved by many authorities, and then the raid takes place. So it's not on a whim that the person may say, I'll come to your house tomorrow and raid you. It doesn't happen that way. So these are the kind of misconceptions, the perceptions that people have of taxmen, which are needed to be immediately abolished, because these are all groundless.
Don't you think the chartered accountants, they are the conduit for corruption?
No, well, anyway, the thing is that unfortunately, in the country, the taxpayer is not aware of his taxes. He's not aware of his accounts, which is something which is totally wrong. You may give the person, the chartered accountant, the lawyer, to take care of your cases, to handle your cases, to submit documents there, to give his arguments there. But you should be knowing what's going on. Most of the people are absolutely unaware. There's no reason to be unaware. Taxes now are not rocket science. You should know how much you earned, what the taxes on the amount is, what you allowed by way of deductions, what are the exemptions allowed to you, and then have an overall view of your affairs, and then give it to him to handle it. So once you know what your affairs are, then nobody can take you for a ride, neither the department nor anybody else.
Actually,
So this book is trying to demystify all this. That tax is not rocket science.
whatever
There's no need to fear him. He's not God.
I had that is I had in my batch 80 IRS officer. I am in chief engineer in the WD. So I know so much intricacies.
Yes.
In-laws has been vice chairman custom department. So we know a lot of things, but still for a simple person, for a normal person, there are difficulties.
Well, I agree, but they are all now, we are moving towards now, like I said, electronic taxation systems. And I think there should be no reason to fear taxmen. No reason at all.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your question, Mr. Puri. Any more questions, viewers? Okay,
Mr.
Mr.
Ranu Valia.
Aluwalia, please
Yeah.
go ahead.
And
Yes.
Kendra.
Ajay ji,
Hello,
Ajay ji, I just want to know how much is the percentage of income tax collection? Is it 3 paisa in a rupee or 5 paisa in a rupee? And is it possible to get that answer?
SI Alwal Sahab, somebody, Mr. Puri just mentioned that
About 80% comes from
taxes to such a large extent. Why have taxes, direct taxes at all? The thing is that the both direct taxes and indirect taxes have their role to play. Now, what happens is indirect taxes, you can't supplant each with the other. Both have to move together, because what happens is that normally indirect taxes such as VAT, for example, GST, earlier excise duties, they used to be regressive by their very nature, because both the poor person and the rich person is paying the same amount of money to buy a particular product, which is an unfair system. It's not equitous. That's where the income tax comes in, where you are taxed on the basis of your ability to pay. That's why the rates are progressive, which is also now being done with the GST. You have different rates for different products, but yet there are many products which are bought both by the industrialist and by the common person, by the person staying in a slum area. So these two tax systems need to go side by side. Both contribute very, very substantially to the GDP. And in the coming years, with the economy also growing, with the industrialization happening, with the progress happening, the contribution of both the sectors, both the direct taxes and the indirect taxes, will also rise correspondingly. They have a very critical role in revenue collection, and also in promotion of investments, of savings, export promotion, industrialization, R&D. So many benefits given in taxes to promote these activities. So it's not only revenue generation, but also what the emphasis is of the government to the priority of the day in promoting something, in ensuring that whatever the government wants by way of helping out the poor sections gets done.
I see that Mrs. Kindra has raised her hand. She, I think, has a question.
No, I will raise the question.
Sure.
Myself, A.K. Kindra. I'm the CFO of a very large company in India. I've been dealing with the department both at the highest level and at the operating level. My personal take is that at the higher level, generally the dealings are good and clean, put it that way. But at the lower level, I can tell you, things have not improved at all, even in the last 40 years that I've been dealing with them. You see, though with all the new changes coming up with the faceless assessments and all that, things are not improving. I don't want to say much because being a public platform, but generally the take is things are not improving at all. That's one. Second, I've also seen, like if I've gone to the office of a practicing chartered accountant, not in Delhi, but outside Delhi, and I asked this guy, I said, like, what kind of a practice you do here? And you have lots of books in your office, the very nice looking office and all that. And what he told me was very eye-opening. He said, look, books are only for the show business. That's not the way the department runs. The department runs very differently. I don't want to narrate in detail because that's not the right way to do for me to do it. So my personal take is, then the take and the experience of working with the department for the last 40 years is that things have not improved even as on date. Even I underline as on date.
Yeah. Mr. Kinder, do you have a question also, or you're just making?
No, but let me react to that. Kinder Sahab, aisa hai, I'm sorry to hear that you had such a bad experience, and it still exists till date. But let me assure you one thing. These kind of officers, this kind of deadwood, these kind of officers who bring a bad name to the department. The department has already started the process of weeding them out. And I'm sure in the coming years, because these things, have been so well entrenched over the last so many decades, that it takes a while for things to get cleaned up and, for things to come back to the way they should be. I think just give it a little more time, and these things will percolate to the last mile. And let's see how the faceless assessments turn out to be. Now you also have faceless appeals before the commissioner appeals. So I think we should, be a little hopeful, positive about what the future will unfold. This deadwood will be a thing of the past very soon.
That's very
Okay.
Let's be positive.
Yeah, that's really good to hear.
Yeah, it was a very good discussion, though I'm a political science student, but you have made it so interesting. He has already bought the book, so I must read it.
So I'll hope to get a feedback after a few days from him.
Why not?
I bought the book. That there will be many antecedents. Of course, I've just read the first few pages in the car when I was coming from the office, knowing, giving your experience in the Mussoorie. That's where I just finished maybe first 2-3 pages only, because we also keep hearing lots of antecedents. I don't want to be saying anything on this platform because that may not look nice for me. But I think with such a learned person like you, I'm looking for more informed information about the department, about the working, and how does it go around. I think I was looking more for that point of view.
Yeah. So anyway, you read the book and then we'll get back later.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It looks to be interesting.
There's a comment from Deepak Manchanda. Thank you, Mr. Mangotia. We look forward to reading your book. Is it available on Kindle?
It is available.
Great.
Thank you.
So the book is available on Kindle. Any more questions, ladies and gentlemen? Any more questions? Okay. On behalf of the Vasant Vihar Club, I would like to take this opportunity to thank you for being with us this evening, Mr. Mangotia. Thank you for shedding light on the workings of the tax department, and also for giving a positive outlook for the coming years. I think that one tip we will try and remember is the customer is the king, and the taxman is the service provider.
Absolutely.
I think that's something which we all need to remember. And delighted to have you here this evening. And at the same time, Raj, thank you for hosting this evening and conducting the session. And to the viewers, thank you very much for being part of this evening. We look forward to seeing you tomorrow at 7 p.m. We have a unveiling of Bharatnatyam, which is a dance performance as well as a demonstration. So we look forward to seeing you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Have a great evening.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thank you, Ajay.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, and good night, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.